Welcome to Church and State with Chris Farrar and Brian McCall. Happy Easter to you, Chris. I hope you had a good Holy Week and are celebrating Easter.
Yeah, our St. Peter Fraternity Parish is still intact. And it was packed. They were busing people in from 2 hours away because in the Arlington Diocese, the caring and tender-hearted shepherds have abolished the Triduum. And they actually had a bus, a literal bus full of people that was rented to come to our fraternity chapel in Richmond, Virginia, or in the outskirts of Richmond, Virginia, which is about a 2-hour ride. And I've never seen a Triduum that well attended. It was absolutely packed to the rafters with people.
Wow, because they really need to reach out to young people who are leaving the church.
Yeah, and it was a young people's crowd too.
Exactly. Well, speaking of which, that brings us to our first topic. The Pope has just released his new show on Disney Plus. Now,
of course,
we could stop there and talk a lot about what is the successor of Peter doing on a Disney Plus show. But it essentially is a reality TV show that he engages with a whole bunch of young people, some of whom are Catholic, some are, I think, Muslim, some are atheists, and talks to them. I'm going to play, just to get us started, to get a flavor for this, the trailer that Disney Plus released for this.
Cerca. ¿Cuánto cerca?
Silencio, ustedes no se movieron. Son la piel de Judas, prepárese. Y el programa era que iban a hablar con el Papa. Es aburrido ponerse a hablar con un cura, usted. Pelota al centro y empieza el partido.
¿Usted tiene nómina?
Si tiene móvil. ¿Sabe lo que es una persona no binaria?
Si yo no fuera feminista, ¿sería mejor cristiana?
El tema de la pederastia en la iglesia.
Fui católica, muy creyente, ya no soy católica.
And that's, I think, the saddest line in this. So here's this young person. I was a Catholic. I was a believer, true believer. I'm not anymore. It really...
What pathetic buffoonery on the part of this Pope. He's turned himself into a mascot for the New World Order. But, you know, we have to make a program note here. See, we're conservative Catholics, and we're not allowed to criticize Disney. Because unlike left-wing activist attorneys who call for boycotts of the companies they don't like and sue them, we can't do that because we're conservatives and there's a different standard applicable to us. And so our opinions can be used against us, whereas the opinions of left-wing radical activist attorneys are just part of the process. I don't think that's fair, do you?
No, I mean... it's the classic double standard that we see everywhere.
Yeah.
But again, what's sort of very sad about this? There's obviously a lot of very sad young people there. I mean, that one person at the end of that clip is a great example that the Vatican II has failed. This is the generation that Vatican II has failed to deliver the faith. I was reading today in the North American Synod meeting, or whatever hootenanny they had. One of the comments they made is, the youth leave their Catholic education doubting whether God even exists. So, I mean, it is very sad. You feel for these young people. But rather than meeting them and bringing them the true message of sort of hope, of truth, he says just bizarre things to them. For example, I'll just give you one quote from the documentary, or whatever we call this thing. He's asked a question about the church's teaching on sexuality and sort of challenged with typical, why is it all suppressed? And here's what he says: I think we Christians haven't always had a mature catechism regarding sex. So he now just dismisses the catechism, the perennial teaching of the church, for 2,000 years as not mature.
His arrogance is unbounded. We know that. I mean, he thinks the magisterium is his personal possession, and that he can alter the magisterium, or what he thinks is the magisterium, by issuing various bulletins in various places and formats, such as his airplane magisterium.
Yes.
He basically undermines the entire moral order by saying things in the air during his idiotic press conferences, such as, you can actually use birth control to avoid being infected with the Zika virus because using birth control is the lesser of two evils. Now, if the Catholic Church were to accept the principle that one can commit a lesser evil to avoid a greater evil, that is the end of the moral order, but he just tosses that off at 36,000 feet, and he expects people to believe it because he has said elsewhere that I'm constantly making statements. That's magisterium. He thinks that anything that comes out of his mouth in response to a question about the faith is the magisterium. And that's been the problem for the past 60 years, this magisterium in flux consisting of personal opinions passed off as church teaching, when we know that the magisterium consists of one thing and one thing only, the deposit of the faith as elaborated in the constant teaching of both the extraordinary, infallible definitions, and universal ordinary, always believed by everyone and everywhere, magisterium, not comments on airplanes or in Disney movies.
Right.
Well, what can we say? This is what we're stuck with until we get another pope.
When you wish upon a star. So give me another couple quotes from this, some real gems. So there's one, again, poor young person who says, I'm non-binary and I'm Christian. This is the new vocabulary. This is the new. So is there room for me in the church? The Pope responds with a smile. Every person is a child of God. Everyone, he says, adding, I don't have the right to kick anybody out of the church. My duty is to always welcome. Well, wait a minute. Aren't you ruling the church? I don't have the right to excommunicate. But he actually can excommunicate and kick out, traditionalists to get rid of, but not. It's just amazing, extraordinary. I mean, on the theological level, we are not all children of God. We are only children of God by adoption through baptism. So, I mean, first of all, it's misleading people to just say, like, you don't have to do anything, do whatever you want. You're God's child. We are born children of the devil because of original sin and need to be incorporated into the church. So
that's why we have access. We have access to the power to become sons of God. We were not born that way. But I don't think he really believes in original sin. I don't really think this Pope does Catholicism at all, if he really wants to. In fact, someone has said, it was years and years ago, that this is a Pope who doesn't even do God. Not really. I mean, he does social justice, he does climate change, he does LGBTQ rights, everyone's a child of God, he does all kinds of trendy liberal things, but there isn't much about death, judgment, heaven, and hell, except that he has said, apparently, reportedly, that there really is no hell. The souls that are damned, if anyone is damned, are just annihilated. The annihilation is heresy. He's a fountain of heresy. Yeah. And practically every day he says something that's contrary to the faith. I don't think anyone really defends him anymore as anything resembling what a pope should be, which is a defender of orthodoxy. He is a disaster and has created around himself, as like Cardinal Pell said, a toxic nightmare.
Yes. Well, again, similarly, I really, when watching this, felt sorry for these young people.
I do too.
She says, well, I've been meaning to ask you, what about church people who use the Bible to promote hate speech? So instead of correcting her and saying, teaching the moral law is not hate speech, here's his answer. He says, every person is welcome in the church, and those who use the faith as a justification for hate are infiltrators. Well, if that's not the pot calling the kettle black, well, sorry.
Brian, I'm really glad that you read all this stuff so I didn't have to.
I threw myself under the bus for you. He says, in general, those who judge are inconsistent. Now we're going to get our tisk at the traditionalists. There's something within them, the people that judge. They feel liberated by judging others when they should look inside at their own guilt. But the day the church loses its universality, the blind, the deaf, the good, the bad, everybody, it will stop being a church.
So everybody's in the church, no matter who he is or what he does or what he thinks. And I guess he thinks that everyone on the planet is a member of the Catholic Church. Everyone is an anonymous Christian, even if he rejects Christianity. Everyone is more or less an anonymous Christian and part of the church. So what we have is a total dissolution of the visible church and its confines. And we have instead utter syncretism. And basically, as Pius XI warned in Mortalium Animos, the abandonment of revealed religion.
Yes.
in favor of this vague sentiment, this religious sentiment of some sort or other that wells up within as part of a natural endowment, more or less, with grace not having any role in the elevation of man from his fallen state, his translation into the state of grace, without which he cannot be saved. He doesn't really think of justification the way Catholics do. He says you're justified if you just invoke the name of Christ, or if you think in a way that Christ would approve of, whether or not you're Christian. As long as you believe in social justice, you're basically a Christian. Everybody's a member of the church.
Well, as long as you recycle, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, he's more concerned about climate change than he is about the salvation of souls, which he presumes to be given, I guess. Doesn't trouble him. The issue of who.
No, I mean, it's gone further than John. I mean, and John Paul II sort of made moves towards this or hinted at this sort of universalist, but he never this explicitly.
No, of course not. I mean, the Assisi event, it's a bit of a paradox. Not even Francis has gone so far as the Assisi event, which did visually something even more dramatic than what Francis says. But then again, Francis has put his reputation behind the Abrahamic house in Abu Dhabi, is it?
Yeah, yes, the Abrahamic house.
The synagogue, the mosque, and the church all in the same location.
Yes.
And a kind of interreligious theme park, which reduces all religions to the same level.
Well, who knows? Maybe Disney's
it's kind of like the Walt Disney of world religions.
Exactly. Where they're going to open a Francis roller coaster.
They're probably just like Disney. You'll have a monorail connecting all three houses of worship, one to the other. Maybe there'll be darkened recesses in each where things will jump out and scare you.
Right. Well, again, you have to laugh or you cry, but it's just the humiliation that's being brought on the church, through this is just, you can only think of, having been through Holy Week, the humiliation of our Lord on the cross. I mean, stripped down. How can this be? How can this be God? Well, that's what the church is going through. You look at something as farcical as this and say, how much more humiliated can the church be?
Well, not much more. I mean, we've reached the final stage of what is rightly called the post-conciliar crisis. And, it's one of the great ironies of this crisis is the Second Vatican Council was supposed to express the faith in a new and appealing way so that the modern world would see just how inviting the faith is. And so the council set out to set forth the doctrines of the faith in clear and persuasive language so that the average person could understand. And what happened after the council? There was an immediate collapse of adherence to the articles of the faith. And Paul VI, in desperation, called upon Jacques Maritain to write up a credo of the people of God, which Maritain, to his surprise, heard read on the radio by the Pope. They had to restate the doctrines of the faith because of Vatican II.
Right.
And it's been declining. The situation has been declining ever since. It's a continuing process of decay, as Cardinal Ratzinger so famously said in his address to the Fraternity of St. Peter. I think it was in the 1990s. A continuing process of decay that has discredited the council in the eyes of many, and rightly so. Not because my position is it's not because the council taught any explicit heresy. It's because the council is a nexus of confusion, ambiguity, and self-contradictory pronouncements, along with a mountain of other things that have nothing to do with the magisterium, like commentary on anthropological commentary on the state of the world and Gaudium et Spes, opinions about social communications, basically term papers on various subjects.
It's like an academic conference in the social sciences.
Never has there been a council like that. Councils were called to shore up the faith against attacks on the citadel of doctrine and dogma, not to muse about the modern world, which, by the way, in every epoch is always the modern world. But for the first time, the church decided that this modern world was the modern world. And we see the results of that time-bound insanity, which expressed optimism, an optimism, as Cardinal Ratzinger said, reminiscent of the Kennedy era. Now, since when does an ecumenical council exhibit the optimism of a politician?
Exactly. Well,
what can one say? The results speak for themselves.
And that's it. You judge things by their fruits. And again, looking at these poor young people who've been abandoned by the church, the fruits speak for themselves. Well, speaking of end games and kind of we're turning our mind to the state, since the last time we talked, we speculated about this looming potential indictment of former President Donald Trump. Well, contrary to what I thought they weren't this stupid to do it. They actually have done it. They indicted him on 34 counts of no crime, essentially, brought him in, arraigned him, and are trying to move forward with this non-case. So the Ministry of Truth has, Ministry of Justice, in its Orwellian sense, has moved forward. So what do you make of the whole thing? What do you think the likely outcomes of this indictment are?
Well, first of all, it really isn't 34 counts. It's one count divided into 34 parts.
Right.
To make it look impressive. Well, what is it really? If you read the ridiculous indictment, it basically says vouchers were issued and checks were issued, all of them in 2017. And this was designed to hide from the American people. I didn't know hiding things from the American people was a crime. Whatever it was that the extortionist, Stormy Daniels, was threatening to reveal, which Trump denies ever happened, the affair, and which Stormy Daniels herself in a letter denied ever happened, the affair. So she denied there was an affair. He denied there was an affair. But because she was extorting him, checks were issued by his attorney, Mr. Cohn, and he used his personal funds, took out a mortgage on his house, paid the whole thing off, and got reimbursed through legal invoices. And this all happened, the invoices and the vouchers, in 2017, after the election. So Trump is accused of attempting to influence the election by payments that he didn't actually make himself, which were entered as on the ledger books of a business that he does not personally control because he had divested himself of all control over the business in the White House. And the influence on the election was deemed to have happened after the election was over. Figure that one out.
Figure that one out, right?
So,
wow.
It's a joke. And even CNN says it basically in its own way, it's a joke. They said, there's no there. Where's the crime? Because the bookkeeping entries, even if they were misleading, would constitute basically 34 misdemeanors under New York law. But the bookkeeping entries deemed misleading were on the Trump Corporation's personal in-house filings. So who was defrauded? Nobody. And there's no felony. So how does he make it a felony? Bragg says, well, the bookkeeping entries were designed to conceal a federal election law violation, or maybe a state law election law violation, or maybe some other crime, information to be supplied later. Maybe during the middle of the trial, he'll let Trump know what crime he was trying to conceal with bookkeeping entries he didn't make based upon checks issued after the election, as to which he really had no knowledge. Good luck. You know, I mean, Dershowitz thinks there's going to be a conviction because, just like the prosecution itself being launched for political reasons, the jury that voted for Bragg, who promised to get Trump, will convict Trump. So the only hope is the appellate division or the Court of Appeals. And I think there's reasonable grounds for belief that either the appellate division or the Court of Appeals will say this is just utter nonsense.
Well, does it have to go that? Could the judge throw the charges out and just say there's insufficient evidence, or does he have to go through with the trial?
Well, any decent and objective judge would do so. But this is a judge who donated, albeit a small amount, to something called Stop the Republicans. So a judge who donated to Stop the Republicans is sitting over a trial, presiding over a trial on an indictment brought by a prosecutor who said, I'm going to stop Trump. Now,
and against the front runner in the Republican primary, right?
If the judge had any integrity, even the appearance of bias is grounds for recusal. This is actual bias. If he had any integrity, he would step aside from this case. And there really should be a change of venue. If you put this case in Staten Island, Trump would be acquitted in half an hour. But they're counting on Democrat voters who basically subscribe to every lie that the Democrat Party tells to commit the biggest lie of all and convict the former president of the United States of a non-crime. I'm going to be fascinated to see what the jury charges in this case. I mean,
yes.
Is the jury going to convict him of a felony consisting of vouchers and checks? What does that even mean? Now, he issued checks, and the American people didn't know why he issued the checks. Dershowitz just pointed out, who in his right mind would tell the public why he paid hush money
Right. Let me tell you what I paid somebody to be quiet about. Right. Okay.
The whole thing is
But again,
preposterous.
this is my other thought looking at it. I thought the checks were issued by this business organization. So wouldn't it be the commission, the entity that committed the crime, not Trump, just because he happened to own a part of it?
Well, of course. Now, I don't know who signed all of the checks, whether Trump signed any of them. Who really knows? But I take it most of them were signed by some corporate official. And after Cohen submitted his invoices, so the invoices were paid in ordinary course, and not just for the 130,000 that Cohen had borrowed money to obtain, but also purported legal services. So the idea is that Trump somehow knew,
Hmm.
even though Cohen said Trump had no knowledge when he wrote to the FEC, his lawyer wrote to the Federal Election Commission and said, this has nothing to do with the election. It was a personal expense using Trump's personal funds to reimburse the attorney who had used his personal funds. The FEC has no jurisdiction. This is Cohen's lawyer. Now Cohen turns around and says, oh, Trump knew about everything. He directed it. This was an election law violation. Yeah, that's it. That's the ticket. It reminds me of John Garfield in one of those movies in the 30s or 40s when he's being interrogated by the police and he recites some stupid alibi. I was at my mother's house. Yeah, that's the ticket. Yeah, Trump told me to do it. That's the ticket.
That's what I'm supposed to say. Right. Okay. Well, it's interesting because I mean, if anybody committed a crime, it seems the guy Cohen did, submitting false invoices to get paid for legal services that he didn't actually render.
I don't really think that this indictment will survive either the trial level process or appellate review. But there are two other things that they're looking at least. Apparently now three other things. There's that absolutely preposterous grand jury investigation in Georgia where they're trying to get Trump and his associates on a RICO violation because Trump made a phone call and said, find me 15,000 votes, meaning the 15,000 votes being hidden somewhere, obviously. And whether they were hidden or not, that's what he meant. He didn't say manufacture fake votes. So that's going to probably result in an indictment, according to the dim-witted grand jury forewoman who's a practicing witch, a total clown who made a circuit of the various talk shows and spilled the secrets of the grand jury. That's that one. Then there's this maniac, Jack Smith, who was supposed to be investigating the classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, which apparently everybody who ever left the White House in any high office has this cache of in his or her residence or office. He's supposed to be investigating that, but now he's expanded the investigation to other things, including, as it turns out, now he's trying to find out whether Trump could be gotten for wire fraud. Because the Trump campaign raised money after the election based on the belief of Trump and half of America that the election was stolen. And that's false. So if you tell people that you think the election was stolen, send money to Donald Trump so he can try to undo the theft of the election, that's wire fraud. No, it's not. It's a First Amendment protected expression of political opinion for which the assistance of donors is sought. And there was litigation that was financed, although a lot of the cases were dismissed for lack of standing. So he's investigating that now for wire fraud, to see if he can get Trump for wire fraud. That's a wonderful catch-all charge, by the way, for federal authorities. If anything crosses state lines by way of mail, it potentially could be charged as a wire fraud. But that's going to go to the Supreme Court because that's a potential federal charge if it ever happens. And there's an obvious First Amendment issue there. So well, I don't know. He might emerge unscathed from all of these ridiculous investigations.
Well, you assume they actually care about the First Amendment.
No, of course not. That's only for them, not for us. By the way, I would tell everyone to support Alan Dershowitz because he's a principled liberal. He wrote a book, Get Trump. I bought the book. I'm probably not even going to read it because I know what he says already. I just bought it to show support for the guy because to the extent that he's been principled enough to defend Trump, he lost all his friends. He's a social outcast. He's ruined in his usual social circles. And for having enough guts to take a principled stand in defense of the hated orange man, Dershowitz should be supported. So go buy the book. It's on Amazon. Get Trump. He shows that all 4 pending investigations against Trump are absolute nonsense.
And again, he's someone who says he voted for Joe Biden. He's not a, he's not a Republican at all, Dershowitz.
But they're terrified of Trump. He has to be stopped because this man and this man alone is talking sense about so many things, beginning with the Ukrainian war, which he'll end immediately if he's elected. The totally corrupted Justice Department. He has vowed to replace all 100 U.S. attorneys, which every incoming president has the right to do and has been done before, with people who are concerned about the law, not achieving political results. He wants to fire all the leadership in the FBI. He wants to restore America's energy independence. He wants to end the neocon foreign policy in general. This guy has to be stopped. And no one else out there is talking so clearly and specifically about a program to dismantle the entire globalist political establishment. And he's capable of doing it too. They know it. They know it, and they have to stop him. Now, I think the only thing they could do to stop him would be physically to put him in a jail cell. Because even if he gets convicted, he can theoretically serve as president.
From a jail cell?
Even from a jail cell, he could serve as president.
Wow. Well, interestingly, at least so far, it seems to be backfiring. I mean, it seems to have really boosted his popularity and his poll numbers, beyond where they were just a few months ago.
Well, it might be the case that if they keep piling on one stupid indictment after another, it will be so obvious to the independents that they're out to get the guy, to stop him, that the independents will think, wow, anyone who's hated that much must be my friend.
Yes.
He must be threatening to do the right thing. Why else would they go after him? Why should they care so much about Orange Man unless he's doing things that happen to be in America's interest and therefore in my interest? And I think he'll get a lot of independent voters because of that.
Wow.
The polls were already showing that independent voters overwhelmingly think that Bragg's indictment is a political stunt.
Well, there you have it, a mess in church and state, as we usually find. But, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, how the timing plays out. If they do it, they're going to probably try to get the conviction, the month before the election, but knowing how they operate. But as always, we end these. I think things get this bad. We talked about the humiliation of the church only so that only God can fix this. And we can't attribute our getting out of these circumstances to any real human instrument alone, that only God can save us from this Orwellian nightmare in church and state. And that is really the only answer. So observing the first Saturdays, praying the rosary, and seeking the protection of Our Lady of Fatima is our answer to all of it.
I think the rosary is critical. It's our nuclear weapon in defense of the right order of society and a restoration of the right order of the church. And I think, in my opinion, Trump's election in 2016 is a political miracle, as to which I'm bet millions of rosary praying Catholics had a role in achieving.
Yes.
And we think of the example of Austria with the Soviets after a rosary rally involving 1 million people, just up and left Eastern Austria for reasons that historians have never been able to explain. They just left.
Yes.
The tanks went in reverse and they went back to Russia. So the power of the rosary is immense. Everyone should be praying the rosary for the intentions not only of Donald Trump for what he represents, an effort to restore some semblance of sanity to this society before it descends entirely into the abyss, which is happening right now.
Absolutely. So say that rosary with your family. And wonderful. Well, thanks, Chris, for sharing your thoughts. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Continue to enjoy your Easter celebrations.
Now we're back in 2 weeks for more good news.
Yes.
All right. Take care and God bless.